My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. On today's episode, I talked to Rose from RNW.net. We talk about player versus player games, player information, hometowns, and a bunch of other fun tabletop RPG stuff. Her and her husband run a online shop that sells various supplements and notepads and things like that for D&D 5th edition. So go ahead and check her shop out. That link is in the description. If you are interested in being on the podcast, you can contact me via Discord or Twitter. And with that, let's jump into the episode. Welcome, everyone. Today I have Rose from RNW.net. Welcome, Rose.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. Rose, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the tabletop role-playing space?
Yeah. So I'm Rose, and I got started, via my husband, who technically tricked me into playing D&D. He was pretty passionate about tabletop games for a long time before I was, and I just didn't really have much of an interest in them, which I now realize was completely foolish. So he kept trying to persuade me to play D&D, and I was like, nah. And the whole vibe of D&D didn't really click with me. It seemed sort of very old school fantasy, and I don't know, I wasn't much into that. And so one day he just made up a game that was sort of loosely based on D&D rules, where it was a mashup between my favorite TV show, which was Lost, and Jurassic Park, which was a movie we both enjoyed. And he created this ridiculous adventure where a bunch of us friends and stuff all land on an island from a plane crash and have to explore. And it turns out that there's sort of weird time travel nonsense and shady government figures and dinosaurs all roaming around this island. And it was a lot of fun. And at the end, he was like, "Yeah, by the way, this is basically what D&D is." And I was like, "Oh, right. Well, then I guess I'll play more of that." So so that's how he got me into it at first, which was very sly of him. And then since then, I've of course run a few of my own campaigns, and eventually just turned that into our job. We both make products for D&D in our shop and for our Patreon as well. And yeah, we've been doing that for a good 5 years now.
That's awesome. So from complete disinterest to turning it into a full-time business?
Yes. Yeah. I know. It was quite a turnaround, eh?
That campaign sounds fun. Was that like a one-on-one game with just you and your husband, or did you have a couple other people that joined for that as well?
No, yeah, we had some friends as well. So that was the first campaign I played in. And then we sort of continued to play with that group where we all took turns dungeon mastering. And yeah, I recently found my notes actually from that first session that I dungeon mastered, and they were just a complete mess. I can't believe I managed to run a session with them, honestly. They were just so vague. I think my biggest mistake that I made as a first-time DM was assuming that the players would do what I thought they would do, which is obviously a really classic mistake. They will always do what you never expect them to do, but I didn't know that at the time.
Oh yeah, they always come up with weird, random
Every time.
things, or
Yeah.
they'll ask a question. It'll be that sly question, right, where they say, "Is there this object in the room?" And you're like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, sure, whatever, why not?" And you're like, "Okay,
Is
so
the
I have
floor
this."
made of wood?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I burned the floor down.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, what system was that? Was that like 5th edition D&D or?
Yeah, that was 5th edition, yeah. That's the only one that I've played personally.
Okay, so you stuck kind of within the 5th edition realm then.
Yeah.
Um, so I found you on TikTok actually,
Mhm.
and the video that showed up for me was I think it was like an end of the year like
Mhm.
big like player versus player type game.
Yes, yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is a tradition that me and my friends have, every New Year's Eve. We have this, huge PvP game, and so each year I try to make it, sort of a different mechanic. So in the past, we've had, like, a maze run, a giant, a giant dungeon, we've had a scavenger hunt, and then this latest year was capture the flag. It's obviously, like, quite different to normal D&D because we are all playing against each other, um, which is why we sort of only do it once a year, 'cause it does get quite competitive. And, we're all, like, drinking, which also makes it just, like, a bit rowdier than a usual D&D game, I guess. Um, Part of, what we do is have, potions that we just make out of, like, tiny little, liquor bottles, and, once a person drinks their potion, their character will get some sort of benefit that will give them a momentary advantage in the PvP game. So yeah, the maze runs, were all done, as, like, individual players, for the first year. The second year, however, I thought it might be more fun if people were in teams. I thought that they could maybe strategize a bit and, like, one of the fun things about, a regular D&D game is that your whole party sort of comes together with their different skills and approaches to, find creative ways to beat whatever's going on. And so I figured that having teams would be a little bit more fun in that way. And it was. We had a good time with that maze. And then the next year, I thought rather than just like a straight up race, maybe having something a little bit more complicated. So we went with a scavenger hunt where we had a really long map that I made, sort of like a 3D terrain that spanned the length of the room. And we had, I think it was three teams, and each one started in a different place on the map, and they were all given sort of incomplete mini maps and vague sort of riddles and clues about what objects they needed to collect. And then there was a witch in the middle of the board, and you had to give all of these items to the witch first to win. Um, and the one of the most fun parts of these games, I think, is how chaotic they can be, because everyone's just really trying to beat everyone else. As quickly as possible. So I decided to just add more chaos to that by having the witch randomly each round switch teams around, which meant that if you were carrying an object that you just picked up and then you switch teams, then your new team now owns that object. And it just made things even more contentious, which was really fun. Um, and yeah, it was a very close call on who won on that one. It was really everyone was running to the witch at the very end, with their handfuls of objects. And yeah, like someone managed to slow down time at the last second with like a potion I'd put in there, and so everyone was sort of like slow mo jumping at the witch with all of their objects. It was a pretty good ending. And then yeah, this year I thought again. About doing something different, and I was mostly kind of just trying to be inspired by like children's games. I think that they're a nice sort of like simple starting point because you never want something too complicated for a night like this. So capture the flag was what I went with. And yeah, again, it was pretty chaotic. I did keep that switch element in where people can switch teams because I thought that if you're holding the flag and you suddenly switch, that's a pretty interesting dynamic to add to things. Um, and yeah, uh, that's that's what we do each year. Um,
How did you handle like initiative in terms of like who goes when?
we just straight up roll for it at the beginning and just keep that initiative the whole way through. So the entire session is played in initiative.
Okay, so it's just that first turn order is determined, and then after that, that's just set. You're
That's
not
just it.
messing with it
Yeah,
at all.
yeah, yeah.
It sounds like for the most part, the players will, attempt to like maybe impede the other players, but not necessarily try to kill them.
Oh yes, that was funny this year. Like usually people do try to impede rather than kill, but this year I had a feeling that this was going to be even more competitive than it has been in previous years. And so everyone for capture the flag started in the middle in like a neutral zone. And the first person like moved away from the cluster of like tokens in the center, and another player was immediately like, right, attack of opportunity, and just like stabbed the moving player. And that sort of set a precedent then for some people really getting into just fighting each other rather than going after the flags, which, is their prerogative. um so this one in like a character on character sense was definitely a bit more violent than usual, but it was pretty funny. So yeah.
You need to have it set up like the Hunger Games where they're all like 30 feet apart on pedestals at the beginning so they don't get opportunity attacks on each other.
I guess so, yeah, but I quite enjoyed this way too.
Well, hey, that's what's fun. Did you have any players that got actually killed during the session?
Oh yeah, a bunch of times. There was it was my husband actually that got killed the most. He was the one that did the first attack of opportunity, and so everyone sort of held a grudge against him. And if there was any opportunity to stab anyone, they would stab his character. And yeah, I think he died maybe 3 times during the session. Um, the mechanic for that was just you make death saves, and I mean, either you become alive again with 1 hit point, or if you properly die you just get sort of teleported back to the neutral zone. But I think if I were to run it again, I'd probably change that, because those death saves can take so many turns. If you're like, yeah, I mean, it can take, what, 5 turns if you don't get the right rolls either way. So I'd probably just shorten that to 1 death save if you die.
Sure. So it's either you stand back up or you're starting back over at the
Yeah, pretty
at the
much.
respawn point. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
smaller penalty basically. Yeah.
And you on TikTok, so anybody listening, you should go check out that TikTok video. You did a pretty large actual like terrain piece for that.
That's true, I did, yeah. It wasn't as large as the scavenger hunt, actually. That one was much bigger. But yeah, I mean, I like crafting and stuff, so I enjoyed just building something. And like, it's New Year's Eve, like there's sort of a lot of festivity for that time of year. So I always want to sort of like reveal the room to all my friends and sort of have them all go like, oh. So I always try and do some sort of like big crazy map so that they're all like excited and interested. So the map that I built this year was sort of like 3 areas, and those were the 3 territories of the 3 teams. So there was just like a forest full of mushrooms, a mountain with bats, and some like fancy gardens with hedges. And each of these territories had like an ally that that team could sort of call upon to help them in that area. So like you could call upon the hedges to grapple people. You could call upon the bats to swarm in a cloud around someone, and the mushrooms would release psychedelic spores that would kind of confuse players, basically. But yeah, how I built the map. I did it in 2 ways. I kind of regret the first way a bit because I started off just doing it in cardboard. Um, I just like cutting inch wide strips of card and then sort of like building that up to make a mountain. And then for the second half, I used foam board instead, and it was just so much easier. And so, if anyone's going to make a 3D terrain map that they want to be fairly simple, go with foam board and do not use cardboard. Would be my advice there.
Well, I would definitely, if I was one of your friends, I would be pumped for New Year's Eve at your house because
Thank
that
you.
just sounds awesome, and it looked pretty cool on the TikTok video.
Thank you. Oh, and I did surround it with fairy lights as well, just to add that little bit more festivity. Why not?
So from kind of your starting point of not having any interest to, running these big, end of year games,
Mm.
what What things have you learned as a dungeon master, kind of along that journey?
Oh, um, that's a good question. I think, um, I mean, the big games that we do are sort of just like for fun. Obviously, we write a lot of content for DMs and sort of make a lot of tools for them as well. Um, and the majority of what I've learned has come from sort of running campaigns, I'd say. And it's uh I don't know, something I've been turning over a lot in my head lately is about sort of providing information to players and to be a lot less stingy and just always pick the funnest option with like giving them information and like letting them do stuff. I think I've made a lot of mistakes in the past where I assumed that they would just pull at threads, story threads, and that like everyone has the same level of investment into finding out what's sort of going on behind the scenes. But like every player has like a different reason for being at the table. Like some of them just want to be silly. Some of them really want to uh, get into their own backstories. Some of them really want to investigate every little thread, but other people just want to sort of plow through the bigger points of the story. Some of them want to just interact with NPCs, but others want to like dig up every piece of treasure. And so, sort of leaning into what you can sense people want to do with what you're putting in front of them rather than just trying to do what you wanted to do with the campaign, I found leads to just everyone having a lot more fun. Because at the end of the day, you've still written or prepared or whatever everything that you're doing, but like hoping that people are going to tug at threads that you didn't even realize weren't that obvious can just lead to like disappointment for a DM. And I found that just like providing them with more kind of story or exposition or details, regardless of if they've pulled threads or not, can actually just uh, give them more to sort of play with. But it always feels a little bit like against DM instinct, in my opinion, to like give them more than you planned to. But I feel like that's the biggest thing that I've learned is just like, yeah, uh, give more than you think.
Do you so does that come out in like just as you're describing things that you maybe give them more detail, or do you like talk to your players kind of like after sessions or outside of the game or even in the game to see like what is it that their characters or that they as players are trying to go for? How does that kind of work its way into the game?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of both. I mean, like, okay, so like one thing that we've made recently, we did it through a Kickstarter, was called The Traveler's Guide to the Sodden Weald. And it's like a campaign setting in a wild magic swamp. But how we published it was there's two books. There's a player's guide and a DM guide, and essentially the player's guide is like an in-world book that tells you all about the plants and animals that you can find in this wild magic swamp region. It tells you about all of the different sort of like mini regions within the area and gives you a very brief overview of towns. It's a little bit like a tourist guide almost, but like in world. And then like the DM book alongside it gives the creature stats, the secrets that are in each area, hidden stuff, treasure, whatever. Um, and like I feel like that's a good example of the way that I like to run things, where like you can give players an entire book and say, "Look, this is everything that you know. You've got this guide," and it actually helps them to be much more engaged and pick out the things that they're interested in, rather than them not knowing what to pick out. So yeah, I think that's a sort of an example of how you can just give players information and they can decide what they want to do with it. Whereas, like, if they don't even know that the information exists because it's hidden behind uh, anything, then yeah, it can sort of lead to frustration on both ends, I think.
Yeah, I can see that, and I think it can be easy as a dungeon master to, you're prepping everything, and if you're running a module or something that you've written, um, you know what all of the stuff in the world is, but the players only know what you have told them about.
Exactly.
So even though their characters would probably know a lot more, at least a lot of like general information. So I think giving them like a handout that just kind of is a brief overview is really cool. And I especially like that you did it as like an in-game item that the characters would actually have, because it just makes it a little bit more uh,
Like
probably.
immersive in a way.
Yeah, yep. And is
Yeah.
that a physical handout that you give them?
Yeah, I mean, for the Kickstarter, we produced physical books, but also, there's digital versions of the same thing. Just depends what people want, really.
So kind of on that note of the handout, when you run your games, do they tend to be a little bit more like sandboxy, or do you tend to have like specific stories, or how does that work?
Hmm. Um, Let me think. I suppose like the right balance to strike for me is like the appearance of a sandbox, but like it's sort of gently guided, um, because I think a complete sandbox can just it can lead to too much work for the DM and also sort of aimlessness for the players. There's got to be something sort of nudging them in the right direction, and just also like reducing prep time for you. I made a mistake with the first sort of big campaign I ran. It was I made a world map because I just wanted to give sort of context to things. I wanted people to be able to maybe like pick a town that their characters were from. But the minute that the players saw the world map, they were like, we should go to every single one of these towns and let's explore them all. And I was not prepared for that. And so I spent a long time writing what was in each of these towns. So like I suppose I try not to make it too sandboxy. But like at the same time you want to make sure that they feel as if they can go anywhere if they want. Um so in the current campaign that I'm running, they the premise is that they're in a small sort of broken town, and there's an old museum that they've discovered some portals underneath, and the portals lead to all over the world. And each portal has like a sort of magic wishing stone, like hidden somewhere within that area that the portal leads to, and these wishing stones will gradually help sort of bring the town back to its former glory. So like the town then is fully fleshed out with like people and things going on, and like the potential for it to grow and improve. But then uh, each one of these adventures that they go through in the portals is essentially like a one shot. Um, so it means that like I only have to sort of prepare these little adventures, but they still get to choose where they go at all times and choose what they do. But because they also have this like town that they're returning to all of the time, they can also build relationships with NPCs, which I find then is more rewarding when they do something for an NPC, or something happens. Like you sort of that building a connection to the place and the people just makes the subsequent events more rewarding, I guess.
It's a neat concept that reminds me of a little bit of like sci-fi games, because typically in like a sci-fi game, your players usually have like a ship or something, so that's kind of like the home base, and then they can kind of zip to wherever it is, have the little one shot session, everything's kind of contained, and then they can come back, and then
Exactly. Yeah,
you kind of, it's kind of that same feeling to and as a game master, it does really limit your prep time, because you're just dealing with the one thing until they get back to town.
exactly.
um
Yeah.
do you do anything? Do you have like encounters and stuff that happen in that kind of hometown area?
Oh yeah, I made a notice board for the town, and that was just to sort of get them talking to people. So it's a little bit sort of like Stardew Valley inspired. So there's just like all of these sort of cute people there who need cute little tasks doing for them. So they're like fairly low stakes, um, and it's just so that people can sort of like mess around, stretch their legs, and then when they want some sort of like serious high stakes adventure, they can go through a portal and do something difficult. Um, But yeah, I mean, the most recent thing that we had from the notice board was a surfing competition in the local river, and so the players spent some time finding like different uh, surfboards and like putting together what they thought would be the best board to surf on to win the competition. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's just sort of like laid back activities in the town. But there's definitely encounters. It's just that they're also just supposed to be very mild, and then like it sets a nice sort of like different pace depending on if you're in the town or through a portal.
And what does your prep look like? Do you end up doing like a bunch of notes, or how do you get ready for a session?
Mm. Um, at the beginning of a campaign, I'll probably do a ton of prep. Things like write the entire town, make sure I know who's there and what's inside each building. I like to prepare just short readouts so that I can give people sort of accurate descriptions, and then we can always refer back to them later if we forgot what's in a building or whatever. And I make like a quite a thorough NPC list where like I have like their name and sort of what they look like and what their occupation is, and then their general attitude. I find that the attitude just helps me remember like how to voice them, how to play them. Just like a couple of words to give me a hint, because when you've got a lot of NPCs, it's easy to forget uh, who acts which way. But then, like, once the campaign's sort of all set up and the world building's all done, the thing that I will always do without fail is when I sit down to prep the next session, I write a summary of the previous session that I'm going to read out to everyone. And that is so helpful. First of all, for me to like remember what happened and to know where I'm going to want to sort of push them next. But then it's also just nice uh, at the start of a session to read out, okay, so this is what happened last time. And I just make it into a little story and everyone sort of settles in. Um, and then the next thing I'll do after writing the summary is just write a few bullet points of like largely what I expect them to do. So it might be, yeah, they're going to go do the surfing competition probably. So they're probably going to want to make surfboards. So then I guess these are the people in town who they can speak to if they need help with that. And just sort of like, uh, yeah. I mean, I know I said before that trying to predict what they'll do is obviously a mistake, and I still think it is. But like having a rough idea of like who they might be able to get some help from if they're stuck, and sort of like general areas of where they're going to like physically be in the game. That's generally what I prep for. And then like if I know that, maybe they've done plenty of stuff in town, they're going to go through one of these portals, I'll just write that one shot as well. But like uh, that just completely depends on what happened last time. But I write it mostly in just like bullet points, and then it also just depends on how much time I have to prep. Like the sessions where I've had the least amount of time to prep, I'll just have that list of bullet points and just like do my best. And that's maybe where I'll just like instead of like trying to come up with some cool monster, maybe I'll just be like, oh, there's this monster that already exists online, and I'll just take the stats for that and put that in or whatever. And then yeah, if I have more time to prep, I will try to yeah, create monsters or create sort of like unusual encounters. Maybe I'll draw a map or make a terrain, make some handouts. It sort of depends what's coming out, but I do like to spend a long time on prep if I can. I like to sort of get crafty with it, and I like to give them sort of like physical things. I just think it's like nice to have as keepsakes from the game, and the our players like to use journals and like make notes and stick these things in, so like it all sort of feeds into that as well.
And your prep for the one shots, is that pretty similar to how you would just prep for like a regular session, or what does your kind of writing for the one shot look like?
So because all of these one shots involve finding one of these like stones, um, all I have to do is just come up with a way that the stone is uh, both obvious where it is, but somewhat inaccessible. Um, so yeah, I think again, like depending on how much time I have, I will start by just making the bullet points of like, right, the stone's here. Um, this is the surrounding area, and okay, so like for the last one, the stone was lying on top of a dragon's hoard, and surrounding the dragon's hoard was a prison um, in this town where there were lots of dragonborn who sort of worship the big dragon and her horde. And they had like a really sort of mean prison, and the portal takes you to inside a prison cell. And so, yeah, at first I just wrote that the the stones on top of the hoard, the dragons here, and like I sort of try and make sure that I get some key info down about like uh the size of the cave that they're in, or how far away the stone is from like we had some walkways that went over the top of the hoard, so you would have to sort of lower yourself down Mission Impossible style to pick up the stone. But like knowing how far you'd have to lower yourself, that was something that I needed to prep up front. So, you know, you just say, "Oh, it's 100 feet," or whatever, um, and then if I have time and I know that we're gonna be coming up against some sort of particular rule, so, like, in this one, we had this 100-foot drop, so I, just had the falling rules, sort of prepared in a tab just so that we'd remember, like, how to deal damage if someone falls and that kind of thing, and, you know, climbing rules, and, having, like, those rules reminders if you know sort of that's probably gonna come up. That just saves you a bit of time faffing around during the game. But then, eventually I did have time to also make, like, a big map for that. Um, and then I also had, like, you know, one of those dry erase maps, for, like, smaller area encounters. So they had a big area map so they could see what was going on everywhere. And then we would just draw maps as we needed them on the dry erase grid. And I didn't have time to prep the actual NPCs in this area. I mean, it was going to be guards and prisoners and a dragon. So the dragon was easy enough to just look up online, just get some stats for a dragon, and the same with the guards. Like they didn't need to be anything too uh, detailed or original, to be honest. And then for the prisoners, I th- I made an NPC list for the prisoners where I just sort of came up with sort of 20 names and 20 crimes and 20 attitudes towards the player characters and the crimes, and that was enough. They actually eventually ended up freeing everyone in an attempt to rush the guards. So it was good that I sort of wrote at least the names and attitudes of these NPCs down, because they did actually get quite picky about which prisoners they wanted to let out, because obviously they didn't want to let out any scary prisoners who were maybe going to cause trouble for the player characters rather than the dragon. So that was a fun thing.
Prison break at the Dragon's Hoard.
Exactly. Yeah.
That sounds like a really fun one shot.
Yeah.
Um, this might be a good time to switch over and kind of chat about your store and kind of some of the projects that you're working on. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, we have a store, and there we have a good mix of different types of character sheets, different like styles and like functionalities. We also have a lot of game master tools and like world building kits. Um, we've made a lot of like item card packs, papercraft buildables. We've got journals, stationery, stickers, notepads, and we've also got a few one shots. Some of which come with entire sort of papercraft buildables themselves. And I think the most recent thing that we released is just the last few remaining pieces from our Kickstarter about the Wild Magic Swamp. So there are now some books and maps available, as well as like a PDF set, so that people can have like a whole little campaign setting if they want, and it comes with a short adventure that's supposed to last about 5 sessions or so. Um, so that's sort of recently what's been going on in the shop. There's so much in the shop, to be honest, by now, because it's been going for 5 years. We've got like class specific sheets, and we worked on like a new and improved version of the character sheet, which just sort of like reorders a few things. It takes things like role play info off the front page, puts that on its own page, and instead like gives you space for like the benefits of a short rest or whatever, and just things that you sort of need to know are all now on the front page, which is sort of handy. Um, things like spell cards and like session summary helpers and all this kind of stuff. It's all mostly digital, but we do have a few sort of physical uh, journals and notepads as well. And then we also have a Patreon, and there we produce sort of we call them quest packs, but they're like a monthly sort of block of D&D content. It's hard to say exactly what it is because it changes quite drastically from month to month. But essentially, we publish a campaign over a couple of years, and we publish it in these sort of monthly chunks. Um, but we always try to put something in that you can just lift out and put in your own game as well. So it's not that you like have to be committed to this particular campaign, because there will always be like maybe some monsters or some papercraft sort of printables, or some shops, or some maps. So like something that you could use in your own game, regardless, if you wanted to. And at the moment, we're actually publishing some new travelers' guides to an archipelago of musical, magical islands, essentially, that are populated by a bird folk who have been enchanted by a goddess to be able to sort of communicate by song. Uh, so that's sort of like roughly what we're doing at the moment. And then right now, I'm just working on our next one shot, which is going to be about magical cats. So that's just about to go into the early stages of playtesting. Yeah.
That's really cool. Um, a lot of those products sound really fun, especially the like little handouts and the journals and stuff. I actually just got um, a D&D character journal from a work Secret Santa thing. So
Mm.
um, I think that'll come in handy when I'm playing in my next game. But yeah, I get reorganizing some of the character sheet stuff is kind of nice because sometimes the stuff on the front page isn't always uh, as relevant as it needs to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to know about your bonds and you know. So yeah, we tried to sort of optimize that kind of thing. And it's also nice to have the journals. Like I use the journals all the time, to be honest. It's nice to just sort of have all of your notes in one place, and it's just like sheets can get really tatty. It's nice to have like a book that it's all in instead.
And do you guys make those, or do you have them printed somewhere, or how does that process work?
We get those printed. I think that we'd never have time to make them all. They do sell out quite fast a lot of the time, so I think we'd be we're pretty snowed under as it is. So like to be making those ourselves, we would be crazy snowed under. Um,
Well, that's a good problem to have, though. Then, so
yep. It's yeah, it's it's a good problem to have. And it's we love what we do. Honestly, it's lovely being able to just build these worlds every day, essentially, and just live in this fantasy sort of world that we've created ourselves. Uh, yeah, it's a really nice job.
so what does like a day in the life of your work look like then?
um, well, that can vary, but Niels and I work together. Niels is my husband, and uh, he does a lot of the sort of illustration work, and he also has a degree in game design. So he does a lot of the sort of nitty gritty stats stuff as well. And we essentially will come up with what we're going to work on together next and divide the jobs up and then sort of like have little meetings, like looking at each other's sketches or reading each other's writing, editing it, saying, yeah, this sketch needs to look like this. And maybe I'll spend a day taking nice photos of what we've made so that we can, show people. And yeah, it's really varied. There's writing, there's drawing, there's playtesting. Obviously, we play a lot of D&D to make sure that everything that we do sort of makes sense. There's always something that comes out in playtesting that you never expected. So it's always a good idea to run it through. Yeah.
Playing D&D for work doesn't sound too bad.
No, it's a nice time. Yeah.
When you're playtesting those things, is it just usually you and your husband, or do you get friends involved?
Oh yeah, no, we get friends involved. We've got lots of very patient and lovely friends who let us play with them. But also, like our Patreon has a Discord server, and we run sort of like campaigns and one shots over there. So whenever we need to test something, there are always people in the Patreon who are up for playing with us. So we'll do it there too.
That's awesome. That's a pretty cool experience. We've been running a handful of games on the server as well. And it's fun to get people from the community to join in and to hang out.
Yeah, exactly. And like I have to say, our patrons are just like the sweetest people. They're very nice players, and we really love playing games with them. So I'm glad that they're there.
Do you have any tips for somebody else that might be trying to start like a store kind of like this?
Um, hmm, uh, I guess my advice would be to a lot of it is just like about making sure that people know about you. You got to continuously sort of like tell people on social media what you're up to. But I think more than anything is playtest. Whatever you've made, playtest it. Like it doesn't matter how confident you are in it, playtest it. um, like there will always be something to improve, and yeah, I think that that's the biggest mistake I see. Is just things that aren't playtested, including our own stuff. Like when we haven't playtested in the past, like it's always been a mistake. So yeah, that's the number one, and then the number two is, yeah, just tell people about what you do, because people won't find you otherwise. So just constantly tell people what you do on social media, and people like to get involved. Like people like sharing, and it's nice to sort of like talk to people about, I don't know, whether it's that you've made a character sheet or an adventure or whatever. And we also get like a lot of really nice messages from people who've played our one shots and tell us how they went. And that's like, it's obviously lovely to hear, but it's also really interesting to know how it goes for other people. It sort of helps us learn more about what people are looking for, what people enjoy, and maybe things that we might not have foreseen ourselves.
Yeah, it's nice. It's almost like another aspect of playtesting, maybe a little bit after the fact, but getting
Yeah,
that feedback is important.
exactly. Yeah.
Are there any encounters? Like, do you have a favorite encounter that you've run?
By encounter, you mean like just like a very small thing, or like a whole session? Like
It could be a small kind of single thing or a whole session. I'm up for either.
um yeah, I think my favorite thing is it's probably one of the one shots I wrote that's in our shop called Spike Patch Grove. It's not everyone's favorite, but like I'm so pleased with that because it's essentially about you're in the wild magic swamp and a nest of gator eggs have gone missing. And the guy who was watching them is a bit of an idiot and needs help finding where the eggs have gone because obviously he's worried about the babies. And without spoiling it, it the solution is just completely non-violent if you want it to be. Like there's no sort of nefarious thing going on. It's all sort of a very innocent explanation in the end, and like the vibe of that adventure is just really cozy and sweet. And when I hear about how people have enjoyed it, people approach it in like really creative ways, and it's I don't know. It's a heartwarming story for me, and I think that that's probably my favorite sort of encounter. Is just like the little moments that you get to play in that particular adventure are all really cute, and I don't know. I like that it doesn't always just have to be about stabbing things and killing things and just murdering monsters. Like this one's just more about like being little swamp detectives with your friends in a chill part of the world, you know?
It does sound kind of cute for a encounter.
Yeah.
How about favorite NPCs? Do you have any favorite NPCs or recurring characters for your players?
Uh, yeah, I think the one that immediately comes to mind is a character in the first one shot we ever published, actually, which was it's called the Tremor Train, and it's about a missing staff member in a ghost train ride, essentially, and the guy who runs the ghost train is like an incredibly negligent fool who due to his negligence, this staff member has, come to a bad fate, let's say. And I get a lot of people sending me messages about this guy uh, because most players end up wanting to get revenge on this guy after they've solved the adventure, as it were. A lot of them sort of like march back up to the guy and either take him to jail or punish him in some way. People get really angry about how how negligent this guy's been running his ghost train, and it just tickles me every time to hear all of the stories of revenge. And for some people, that guy's become like a recurring villain in their entire campaign after that, and just like I love it. Like so, I think he's probably my favorite because it's just I would have never expected that to come out of the Tremor Train, but yeah.
You're just going for negligent, but you've somewhat created a villain for people.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I mean, like, he's, like, crazy negligent, like, and just terrible. I mean, like, people start talking about labor laws and all of this, like, I'm trying to not spoil the story too much in case people haven't played it, but, like, he's he's terrible, obviously, but, like, he's terrible in a yeah, I guess, like, a vaguely capitalistic sort of way.
Do you have any other things that you're passionate about, or that you'd want to talk about?
At the moment, this is this is a lot about where my sort of uh, interests lie. Um, we have um, we have been working on um, a little PDF book called "The Ancestries and Cultures of Hemelin." It's essentially a book of player options that replace race in fifth edition, and instead, yeah, separate them into ancestries like what your parents were like, and cultures, which is where you grew up. Hemelin is the fantasy world that we set all of our stuff in, and essentially, this book sort of creates alternative ways to build a character that are, yeah, less inherently racist and more about making characters that like whose backgrounds make sense based on both like how they were born but also how they were raised. And yeah, I think that that's a pretty important thing to add into the community at the moment. We weren't the first to do this. I mean, like Arcanist Press made their Ancestry and Cultures book, and so this is something that we sort of were inspired to do based on what they've been doing and others. And yeah, I a lot of people who've been using the book have really enjoyed it so far, and we plan to come out with some more ancestry soon. the ones that we covered in the book were just largely the ones from 5th edition, gnomes and elves and humans and all of that. But we also like to add a few of our own in. We have, gator folk and things like this. And we're working on a few more, which we hope to put out in maybe a version 2 at some point. But yeah, I think that's a pretty important thing to add in the community as well.
Yeah, no, they kind of did that with Tasha's with the like custom lineage or whatever, where you kind of pick pick kind of like the form that you want, and then kind of pick your features based on that. But it might be neat to have something a little bit more specific or thought out than basically just mix and match whatever you want, basically.
Yeah, yeah, I quite like how we've sort of put it across is that it is quite a mix and match just because I mean, uh anything could be mix and match. So you can have multiple ancestries and this kind of thing as well. But it just means as well that like, a half elf or a half orc, like at the moment in 5th edition, it's just presumed that the other half is human. And so here it's more like in our book, it's more about yeah, like any combination is possible. So yeah.
That is pretty cool. It would lead to very different characters than we see currently, which I think is good.
Yeah, a bit more of a diverse range, I think. And just, it's also not attributing all of the classic stuff like intelligence to certain races or like alignments to certain races and things like that. It just gets away from all of that.
Do you have a favorite house rule that you use?
None come to mind at the moment, to be honest.
So not necessarily house rule, but you did mention that you like when your stories have maybe non-violent solutions. Do you tend to make sure that that is an option for kind of most of your sessions?
Largely, yes. Yeah, I mean, like, I suppose unless someone like unless someone's being sort of like outwardly violent to the player characters, in which case they might just it might just make sense to be violent back. But generally, I do like to include non-violent options. I just think it brings a bit more interest to the game as well, and I feel like people have more creative solutions when they don't just have to fight everything all of the time. So yeah.
Fifth edition has like largely combat based abilities for characters. Does that seem to work all right for you, or do you find yourself wanting to like add like different things for people that let them have abilities that work more in like social or exploration type areas?
I mean, the social and exploration type stuff is also there. So like I don't feel generally like I need to add much in that way, I guess. Uh like I think my favorite thing like when I'm a player at least is being some sort of spellcaster and using my spells in creative ways, rather than just use the spell to deal damage, maybe use the spell to levitate this thing and that, knocks this thing over here and whatnot. And I just like I think there's also like with all the games that we sort of run or play, the most fun memories are the times that we're sort of doing role play in some way. So like we leave a lot of space for role play. Um, uh, just that sort of like leads to the exploration and sort of chatting to NPCs, being able to sort of converse with them without just everything immediately ending in a fight. Like I will like generally try to draw things out a little more before rolling initiative because like the minute that you roll initiative, a lot of people take that as a signal as right now you're fighting. And so I try to sort of leave that until the last possible moment just to give everyone a chance to resolve it some other way first if they want. And yeah, sometimes they take that, sometimes they don't.
Players can be unpredictable.
Oh yeah.
One more question for you.
Yeah.
If you could have any RPG book created, what would you put in it?
If I could have any RPG book created, like, um,
Oh, so like if you, and maybe this is a bit tricky since you guys do put out D&D content. But like if you could just have like if there was a book, like what book or what would you want in a book that would help you maybe run a game better that you could have at your table that doesn't exist currently?
I suppose something that I would find useful is uh, a book on how to introduce people to D&D. We're really lucky that pretty much all of our friends are just into it now already. But when you put a character sheet in front of someone, I think it's really overwhelming. I think that running a game and then like having your players just have no idea that they can even roll to investigate or something like this. Like they're just looking at this character sheet with all of these things going on. They have got no idea what to do. Rolling the character, even in itself, is like quite a task. And like I feel like that's the biggest barrier to entry at the moment is just like learning how to play. And like at the moment, a lot of people learn by just listening to a podcast first, and that gives you a rough idea of like how to actually go about it. But I don't feel like there's enough resources for like how how to like genuinely get started in a way that seems sort of like low pressure and easy. Like even maybe I don't know, character sheets that sort of level up themselves where at first you just have really simple character sheets and the longer you play, the the closer you get to using like just the regular sort of character sheet because so much of it is just overwhelming for people and I think that we could do with a guide on just like how to get people into it more. I think it would benefit everyone in the end.
Yeah, that's actually a neat concept. There's a board game that we have. It's a Harry Potter uh, like deck building game, and that character sheet idea made me think of that because when you start the game, there's like a couple of levels. The first, like every new level, you open a new box of stuff and you add like a new game mechanic
Yes.
to the game. So the first like three games are really like just teaching you how to play the game and you don't have everything yet. And then once you hit that fourth level essentially, then you have basically what it would be considered like the core
Mhm.
gameplay, but then every box after that is basically upgrading the challenge to make it harder and harder and there's more things you have to worry about. um, I agree with you. For me, I'm the one in my group of people that play that is most invested, and I don't mind digging through all the rules and figuring out what all the stuff on the
Mhm.
character sheet means. But for the other players that are less invested,
Exactly.
or maybe just don't quite understand how stuff is set up, that initial going from not playing to trying to put everything onto a character sheet it could be a lot simpler,
Absolutely. Yeah.
um, and without necessarily having to go to like D&D Beyond or some other resource and pay money to have stuff all built up for you, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, even knowing where to go or like how to roll the stats at the beginning and stuff like that. Like it's just yeah, the fact that there are different ways to roll the stats if you want and just like all of that stuff is like it's not going to occur and like I feel the most sorry for like those groups where they all know that they want to play D&D because like it's appealing to them in some way but literally no one has any idea including the DM because they're all new to it like those people need help in like in a nice way they need help like I wish that there was something just like a little bit easier for people to just be able to know what they're doing in those initial stages.
Yeah, I could see a character sheet like you said where you start with like maybe just your stats.
Exactly,
And
yeah.
then the next time is like, okay, now you've got stats and skills
Yeah,
and then you add your equipment and stuff or whatever, some combination of that.
exactly.
And then you slowly get to here's what a real like level one character sheet looks like.
Yes.
And then build up from there. You could probably build out a little adventure too, like a tutorial adventure almost
Exactly,
with
yeah.
that as well, which would be kind of a neat
Yeah.
idea.
It's one sort of thing we wanna work on, but, having the time to work on anything is always our biggest challenge, honestly. We're just constantly swamped.
Well, Rose, it was really fun talking to you. I think it was a really good conversation, and I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Dungeon Master's Toolkit podcast. You can find links to all of the products and resources that we talked about on the show in the show notes. And if you'd like to join the community or find out how to be on the show, check out our subreddit or join us in our Discord server.